So, VK on the beat, check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1473 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, the best baseball in the city outside the Dome. Join the club and purchase a membership today at mapleleafsbaseball.com. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. Season 6 of Yes, We Are Open, an award-winning Moneris podcast hosted by FOTM Al Grego. And Red Leaf Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making his Toronto Mike debut, it's actually his exit interview. It's Mark Zwolinski. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Looking forward to it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you resisted my invitations in the past, right? Am I misremembering? I feel like we had exchanges, and I'm like, I need to collect the whole set. I need all the Toronto Star Sports writers to drop by, and you kind of resisted it, but here you are, so that's amazing.
Well, I'm not sure why I did it. I'm, pretty naturally shy. I actually ghosted my own retirement party unintentionally. So,
okay, what's that story? I was invited to the Steve Buffery retirement party. Like, I got my way in there, and he sure didn't ghost that. But what? They were throwing you a party, and you didn't show?
Yeah. Generally, we do a Christmas party around Christmas. This was post Christmas on the 28th. I had unfortunately a very shall we say, miserable Christmas Day in a family thing. So I headed up north, and you know where this is going now. I had no idea there was a Christmas party that was supposed to be my retirement party. So I'm sitting up north. I just went away to get away from things and chill out. And on the 28th, I get a text from my good friend Kevin McGran.
FOTM Kevin McGran.
Yes. And he says, "Where the hell are you?" And I says, "What the hell do you mean?" And he says, "There's 70 people at the bar here."
Oh my God.
And you're not here. Wow. And they had gifts and they
make up. Of course, it's your retirement party.
Yeah. Well, I was mortified. I was up in Wasaga Beach at a place there, and I couldn't make it. And everybody had a good time because it was kind of like a Christmas party. But the word that went around afterwards is that I'm unique. So that's how I ghosted my own party.
That's an amazing story. But I mean, in your defense, you don't know that's your party.
No.
So you thought you were ghosting like a holiday party.
Yeah. Well, I'll admit something here too, that I normally not hosted, but tried to put together Christmas parties for years at the Star. They kind of waned from a thing where there'd be 20, 30 guys, Rick Matsumoto, Alan Ryan, Garth Woolsey, all the oldie goldies.
I love these names, by the way.
Yeah. People I learned from and who helped me in years and years ago. It kind of, like I said, Wayne filtered down from that to a gathering of 6 people. Last year, I stood and then sat and ate a bunch of appetizers by myself for 3 hours and nobody showed up.
Oh my God.
So I wasn't really going to come to this year's one, just, I'm afraid to say out of spite, but
right.
I had no idea. I had no idea, and away we go. There's a bunch of people there, and when I caught up with them all again at a Leafs game, I certainly got the reverse ribbing on it.
Well, at least you're loved, right? Because I mean, if an asshole retires, there's no party with 70 people and gifts, right?
Yeah.
They might party without you intentionally, like to celebrate that you're finally gone, like ding dong, the witch is dead. But you were beloved.
I'm not one to pat myself on the back, but that was really nice. And we kind of made it up when I got onto the Media Wall of Fame in Scotiabank. We went out the night before and a bunch of people showed up, and it was really nice. Like, again, you don't try and look for these things. You don't want to, stand in the spotlight long enough. Just like a hockey player, it's all team, it's not the individual. But it was a nice moment for me, and certainly a really memorable way to sign off on 41 years in the business.
41 years. So the big question I have is, like, when you get to cover sports for a living, like, that sounds like a pretty cool gig. Like, why? I mean, 41 years is a good run, but why retire? Do you want to enlighten us, like, why you decided to step away from the Toronto Star?
Well, there's a good and bad side to it, like anything else. I mean, I'm 63 years old. I was going to retire at 65. They paid me to go away, so...
So is this like a voluntary package, like opportunity that you pounced on?
Yeah.
Because David Schultz came over here. He was in a room with the Globe and Mail, and then they announced voluntary packages, and he leapt out of his seat. Apparently, like, he was giggling, like he couldn't even hide his joy because he was so excited waiting for one of those to come along. So were you kind of like, oh, if there's a good opportunity to cash out on my way out, like get one of those packages, I'll take it? You were in that mode?
Well, I wasn't interested. I wanted to work till I'm 65. I probably would have worked a little longer. Unfortunately, there comes a time when, you're not, it's not that you're not wanted. It's just that you're an antique, right? And they're paying you a certain wage, and they can pay a younger person half of that, right? So you have to look at that. You have to look at the business, and we all know that newspapering isn't what it used to be for a lot of reasons. It's still a fantastic piece of information, but it's competing with other places and other devices, other outlets. And again, nobody picks up the paper to read unless you have a major scoop. You're not going to read a newspaper for a game story anymore. So
good point. Yeah.
I kind of, like I tell people, my taste in music and then my taste in cars stopped after 1970, right? So I kind of an old school person here, and I'm proud of that. But at the same time, you kind of realize it's not that you're a dinosaur. It's just that, it's time. There's a window, and a couple of people in the union at the Star said, there's a sweet spot, and this is it for you. There may not be another sweet spot like this. There may not be a newspaper in a couple of years. Who knows, right?
Right.
So, my wife and I decided that this was the right thing to do. I don't think you're going to hear too many other sports writers or meet them who said they could spend 41 years in the same place. Somehow I survived it. I don't know how myself, but... well,
we're going to walk through it a little bit here. We're going to find out. But I got to say, how has retirement been treating you? Like, any regrets?
No. I can walk away from something in 10 seconds and have no regrets, and I could have spent 100 years on it. I'm very fortunate in that I have a lot of passions, drag racing, model railroading. I'm president of the Toronto Model Railroad Club.
And it looks like you might lift a little bit.
I do. I'm actually
I'm not going to mess with you.
A lot of people think that, but trust me, it's just the shirt. I'm out of shape right now, but I will be in shape shortly. So
okay, you're getting there. But okay, congrats on retirement, and it's nice that you get to ring your own bell, right? Like, at least you decided. You always planned on 65. An opportunity came up a couple of years early. You talked it out with your wife. You decided this is the time. No regrets. But there are a lot of people in your industry who won't get to, like, choose their exit. Like, they're going to be called into a room, and there's going to be someone there with a folder, and there's going to be somebody from security or HR, and they're going to be like, your time is up.
Yeah, well, exactly. If there's a fortunate person out there, it's me. I said that in my little speech. And I was not only that. I think we're really, really fortunate in Toronto to have, I don't know if it's underrated or unheralded, but an absolute superb sports writing and sports reporting group industry here. I was part of that, and they helped me. I said to them, one of the biggest reasons I'm up on this wall of, the media wall is because of you. Wow. When I slip or when I started in this business, my editors would tell me I was illiterate, So I looked at the people who did it well, and they were younger than me, and they were older than me, and they were my same age, but it was like my net, And so not only am I fortunate to have a chance to spend that much time, and then a chance and an opportunity to say when I could go, but I worked with, in the real gratuity years of the business, with people who, I could never replace in my life. I couldn't have asked for a better gift of a career that way.
Well, as we walk through it, you're going to shout out more names of people who were there. You got there in 1984, right? I'm talking about the Toronto Star, newsroom.
Actually, I was in there in 81.
81.
I remember going down. I was in York University after my minor league baseball career with the Mets.
Which we're going to talk about because I got questions.
So I was actually afraid to become a journalist. I was at York University, and it took me a year before I'd walk into the Excalibur newspaper there. But fortunately, there was a silver lining to that, because in that year I walked in, Paula Todd was the editor, and she sent me down to the Star. Paula's one of the top journalists in Canada, and I'm sure people know of her. And
shout out to Steve Bacon, yeah, for
yes, sure. Yes, indeed. I went in, and Paul Warnick, God rest his soul, was the editor back then, one of about 12 or 13 I've had. And I gave him a story on some soccer player at York University who was terrific, and he turned it down. But he said, come back again. So the next time I came, I had my nice little cheap suit on and polished shoes. I rode the subway down to the Star, very nervous, and I handed him a story on Brent Gretzky, Wayne's brother, and he took it. And I took the subway home, and it was like I was flying. It was the first story that ever, and that was in the 81.
81.
And so that was it. I started from there. They had openings for freelancers, as they're called. That I don't even think that exists anymore. But that's how it started, and again, very
it does
fortunate.
exist, but it's for people like you now. Okay, it's for you guys who spent 41 years at the Star. You can come back and like Damien Cox style and write pieces freelance.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that, and but that's how I started, and it was it was interesting, and there was room for it too, and that this is something that it kind of weighs a little heavy on your heart, because you want to leave, like listen to Marie-Philippe Poulin saying about women's hockey. She's ready to, probably in a few years, ready to leave, and what she said what really meant a lot to me was that she wants to leave hockey in a better place than what she started. I have always thought that myself, that you could set it up, or at least be part of something, be a brick in the wall. That
Shout out to Pink Floyd. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I don't know if I can actually
when
say
you
that.
start, when you walk in, when you file that first piece there on Brent Gretzky or whatever, you have no inkling that the internet is coming.
No.
Like the greatest disruptor of this generation, one of the greatest disruptors of all time, after maybe the development of the printing press, okay, is the internet. It changes everything. And one of the industries that got smacked particularly hard by the internet is newspapers.
Yeah. Well, here's something for you that how it was in 81.
Oh, how good. Okay, so I want to know how it was in 81, and I want to know, basically, who was there. I want to know everything about your start at the Star. But can we start?
Yeah.
You played pro baseball.
Yes.
Okay, I just had Rob Butler here, and I realized, Rob Butler's only actually, I don't know about pro, because did Fergie Oliver play pro baseball? Maybe there's a big
can't remember.
Okay, anyway, so but bottom line is, so Rob Butler's here, and I'm like, oh my god, like how has it taken me so long to get a Blue Jay here? Like there's a guy who won the World Series in '93, and he manages now the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, which I'll get back to in a minute. But then Tyler was on the show, and he's like, he's not your first Major League Baseball player, because Joe Siddle's been over, and I'm like, that's right, Joe played pro ball, of course. Yeah. Now you never made the big show as Bull Durham. Like you didn't make the show, right? You played in the minors. So can you just give us a little vibe? I'm not sure if everybody knows this, that you played pro baseball for a couple of years in the New York Mets organization, right?
Yes. I used to play out of Keelsdale with York Legion, and then York in the old Labatt's League or whatever it was called back then. It was just like a senior league. There's junior and senior, but I got noticed by Dr. Ron Taylor, who, as people know, pitched with the Mets in the 60s.
Right.
And went down to Little Falls, New York, and then in Florida. Didn't make it. Wasn't good enough. That's the bottom line. You can make all the excuses you want, but in the end, are you good enough?
So you're not drafted, right? But you're undrafted, but you sign as like a walk-on or a free agent. How did it work?
You sign a pro contract.
Okay.
Didn't make any bonus or anything. They just said, you want to play, come down and play. Like I wasn't, I was some kid from Toronto, Canada, which.
You were the other kid from Keele Street.
Yeah, it was. But, you go down to spring training and somebody asks you, what street is Toronto on, right? So they don't really know you. You're nobody. I mean, Billy Bean was there. J.P. Ricciardi was there. They were teammates.
Those are big names.
Yeah, they were teammates. And, Billy, I think at that time was a second-round pick, and his bonus was $250,000, which to us was, amazing. And we used to, spring training was down in St. Pete's, and we'd walk a couple of us over to, because we weren't allowed anywhere near the Al Lang Stadium, which is where the pros played, but we'd walk by there and there'd be a big red tarp on the fence, black tarp on the fence. And we'd look through the hole in the tarp and we'd see Lee Mazzilli get out of a black Corvette. And that
Future Blue Jay.
Yeah. That was like, they said, that's Lee Mazzilli. And I said, okay, I think I know who that is, but I loved his black Corvette better. So.
Yeah, you're a bit. As you mentioned earlier, you're like a gearhead. Like you're a big car guy, right?
Absolutely, runs in the family. Doing a lot of it now. And helping an old hot rod friend restore a couple of 1929 Model A's right now.
You know who does this? Blaine Schmidt does this in Erin, Ontario. Yeah,
yes.
He's become a bud. And shout out to the Argos. We'll get back to them later. I got a question for you about the Toronto Argonauts. But so you have a couple years playing pro ball for the New York Mets in the minor leagues. And then what happens when that doesn't work out and you come back to Toronto here? Is it just that you want to stay involved with sports? Like, where is that moment where you realize you'd like to be a sports reporter?
Well, there wasn't a moment. It was more of a fallout from sitting in the basement with my then girlfriend, Iris, in the basement of my parents' place and saying, basically, what the H am I going to do?
Right.
I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't want to go back to school. So I did go back to school and studied, English literature and poetry. And, I wasn't really going to go anywhere with that other than I really enjoyed it. That kind of lit a fuse in my writing career, though I was a terrible writer then. But we kind of, like I said, went into the Excalibur, and that changed everything. And I didn't know what to do. I still was, talking with my now wife, Iris, about what are we going to do? Really, I'm going to be sitting for the rest of my life in my mom's basement, not paying her anything and not having a job other than summer jobs. But that turned into that door after a year of having too many nerves to actually go through that door. I still remember that. It's absolutely crazy, but it turned out everything went uphill from there, and I got a break with that Brent Gretzky story, and away we went.
Away you went. Okay, so when you get to the Toronto Star, paint the picture for me. Like, I'm trying to do a compare and contrast. Like in the the early '80s, what is the Toronto Star sports newsroom like versus maybe today? And also, who was there? Because I grew up reading the Star, so it's like, okay, you got Milt Dunnell, you got Randy Starkman. On Monday, Mary Ormsby's here. Like,
yes.
These are these legends, right? Like, maybe let's hear from you. Who were your mentors there? Who was in the building? How many people were in the sports department back then? Paint a picture for me, man.
Well, first of all, you go in and it's much, much more populated than it is now. I think the Star probably has 5 live writers, including columnists now. Back then, you had 15 to 20 people on the sports desk, 3 of them handling hockey, 3 of them handling baseball, and they were all ex-writers who probably knew more about it than, a young 20-something reporter did.
Wow.
But you could walk in and Jim Proudfoot would be on his Underwood, typing with one finger, and then the phone would ring, and everybody knows this in the Star knows the story how Jim hated when the phone would ring, but he'd be the first to answer it when it rang, I guess because he didn't want to hear it. He wanted to focus on his stories. And somebody would say, hey, can I report a high school score? And he says, fine. And he'd hit the hold button, slam the thing down, and everybody just know that's Jim. But Milt was there. But the crazy thing back then, it wasn't, like Wayne Parrish, one of the top. Well, at that time, it's Wayne's moved on to other things, and he's still one of the legendary columnists. But he was young back then, and you would not, the top right column in the sports page was Milt's domain, right? Like,
right.
You don't touch that stuff. But Wayne was in there. Wayne was that good. I looked up. I didn't even want to approach him. He was, just everybody in there seemed like God. Rick Matsumoto, Rick Fraser, Frank Orr, Mary Ormsby was at the Sun back then, and she came over later. But they're, sports editors, like, they had the power to just dial up Harold Ballard. What the hell's going on? Why didn't we get this? There was a lot more of that, like traditional, barnstorming journalism. Place was loud. When I was freelancing, I wasn't allowed actually to come into the Star and physically type my story. So one of the first assignments I had was covering the Marlies in the last years of Ballard's ownership. So I had a 1972 Toyota with holes in the floor. I had to physically write out my story on an old piece of, I guess they called it foolscap.
Right.
Tried to make it as legible as possible, and the heater wasn't working in my Toyota, so my fingers were freezing. Then I'd walk into the store all proud that I had like one page of a Marlies game. They would curl the paper up into like a tube shape, put it in a glass kind of container, send it in a 10 system that rattled. The piping overhead rattle, and it would go out to the copy editors, and they would type it into the system then, and then they'd give me the go ahead so I could go home. But you weren't allowed to use the equipment back then, and but I'd sat in the office and made friends with people, and they always, one thing about Milt, there was two people that Muhammad Ali apparently would call back in the sports world. One was Howard Cosell and one was Milt Dunnell.
Wow.
And I could remember him just sitting there, and Milt was very quiet a lot, right? Like he watched everybody and everything, and then he would talk to people, but mostly he sat and watched. And that's what I remember most about him is that, and Jim was the same way, that they'd watch and see what everybody else is doing, and then they'd get the killer story. And Milt would get a call back late at night from Harold, and Harold would rail on about something, and Milt would calm him down. And Milt had that power. Frank Orr had that power. When you walk into a press box, Bobby Clark, then with Philadelphia, would come up and shake his hand. And I said, Christ, that's Bobby Clark. That's like, 1972, Summit Series. That's right. Bobby Clark, Broad Street Bullies coming up out of nowhere to shake Frank's hand. And they would just chat. And, Frank had me under his wing a little bit back then. And it was like, I said, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Like I said, everybody was like a journalist god back then.
Did you have like an imposter syndrome or anything of that nature?
I don't know about that. I was just naturally shy, and it's not a question of whether you think you belong or not. It's just like,
oh, that's your phone going up, but it's
holy cow, it's just like these are the people you were reading, like the year before when you weren't working, you were reading these folks.
Yeah.
In the paper, trying to study how they wrote, how they approached game stories. There was structure to it, right? That was all new, and it was you were very nervous about that, very, very nervous, and you wore good clothes. And I remember Dave Perkins telling me, you're representing the Star. Paula told me the same thing. You look your best. You dress for success type thing. Never, ever, ever go in and represent the company underdressed or, anything but your best self. Put it forward. It stuck with me. And of course, a lot of that's disintegrated because back then you went in Maple Leaf Gardens press box, everybody was in a suit or had a tie and blazer and a jacket. So
when does that change? Like when does that, like, is it a slow transition or because
I would say late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, so when they leave Maple Leaf Gardens, maybe.
I think that probably, you're right, Mike, that it went out the door. When the Gardens went out the door,
right.
And not so much. There's still people who dress up, and the young kids, especially on TV, they have to look good, and they do. And I admire a lot of them on Sportsnet and TSN how hard they work, and they look great every day. And I tip a hat to that because I'm one of the people who I still dressed up, but I didn't wear a suit anymore. I didn't. have my jacket on. Like especially in the summer, you just come with something light on, and sometimes jeans. I always tried to stay away from jeans, but you let that slip too. So
sure. They made a decision. No more Paul Morris, no more suits. Like this was the decision made. I think.
Yes. And again, things change, right? But it became a much more relaxed, and it's a type of thing that. But Dave Perkins always told me, don't let that happen. He always told me a couple of other things. When you're in baseball, score the game right to the last out. Because if you miss something, you can go back and check it. Make sure you have it. Don't rely on the internet. Don't rely on anything else. You have it. And, that was very valuable because a couple of times, if you're looking at, say, reporting on Roy Halladay, how many walks did he, how many pitches did he throw? You were writing that down. And back then, that information wasn't, like right at your fingertips like it is today. So there was value in all that stuff and the traditions and the advice and just the strict discipline was something that would stick with you as you grew up.
So these veterans, although Perkins not that much older than you, right? Like I'm just doing some math in my head, unless I've underestimated Dave's age. But these guys who are there kind of teach you the ways. But did you pass that on? Like, so as younger journalists enter the door at One Yonge Street there, did you guys, you mentor them and kind of teach them this is the ways, pass that on?
Absolutely. Like I have a good reputation for that. And then, people remember that. And they always said you were the one that people was kind to me when I started. And it wasn't so much having to show them the ways. I always said, if you ever want help with anything like that, but it was more like, come on in here. Do you need a phone number with anything? If they were sitting there, they didn't have a phone number to a player or to an executive, I would try and help with that. Here's the quickest way through the media gate to get to the Blue Jays dressing room, or here's another elevator you could use to avoid the crowd. Any little detail like that, and
the good old days when you could do that. Like that must be disconcerting that you had this era where you mentioned Ballard's going to call you back or whatever. Milt would get Muhammad Ali to call him back. Okay, it today, how many layers of PR and control? I mean, you can't just call up Nylander and ask him about whatever. Like you can't just kind of. It's not the same, right? It's so controlled.
No, the last real kind of access, I guess you would call it, that I had like that was back in when JP Ancibio was the Blue Jays catcher.
Right.
We still traveled with the team a little bit back then, and that's where it's just familiarity, right? Like Joe Carter wouldn't talk to rookie reporters, right? He would talk to them in a scrum, but he wouldn't really talk to them one-on-one. He just had a basic, like a loose rule. He wasn't rude about it, but he said, take your hits,
right.
Serve, pay your dues.
Right.
And he would talk to you later on. But I had a story on him when I was, I think, a rookie, not so much a rookie, but in my first or second year, that he had after his home run. He had an invite from Bill Clinton to jog in Washington. And when the Jays were playing Baltimore, Joe went and did that. And I don't like to use the word scoop, but I actually was the only one who had it. And he was really
well, that's a scoop.
Yeah, he was really ticked off that anybody knew about that. But he gave me the time of day, and I earned his respect after that. So that's how some of those things happen. And meeting Michael Jordan, the same thing was very. It was totally like in his final. It was when the Raptors were still playing out of the dome, and post game, Michael wasn't really talking to reporters. It was his final years, unless there was something big that they needed to talk about. But he didn't talk all the time.
Right.
I had no idea. I went into the post game Bulls dressing room, and I looked for him, and he was in the back corner. I remember him. He had one foot up on a stool. He was tying his shoes up. He had the most beautiful white shirt I'd ever seen. And I've mentioned this story to a couple of people before, but I didn't know whether to talk to him or look at that shirt. It was just incredible.
It's a hell of a shirt.
And I went up with a very nervous and shy voice. Oh, Mr. Jordan, do you have a minute to talk to me? And he didn't look at me. And I go, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll try some other time. And he turned around and said, hey, kid, sure, what do you want? And I talked to him for 10 minutes, and it wasn't anything special. And after I left, and after I said thanks and everything and shook his hand, all the other beat reporters came up to me and said, what the hell are you doing? How did you do that? What did he say to you? And I had no idea what they were talking about. It was just, like I somehow just innocented myself into it or fluked off.
Ignorance is bliss.
Oh, it was bliss back then. But anyways.
Well, Mark, like 10 minutes one-on-one with Jordan back then, you can turn that into a mini series now. Like that could be a book, okay? This is, my 10 minutes with Mike. With Mike, I think that's the title of this book, actually.
I couldn't even remember some of the questions. I imagine they were extremely whatever. But he
didn't Perk tell you to take good notes? Come on. I bet you got that notebook somewhere. But okay, amazing. I just want to shout out the fact that I will be having Joe Carter on this program in June. And this was arranged thanks to FOTM Rod Black. See, this is how it works, Mark. Now that you're an FOTM, a friend of Toronto Mike, we got to scratch each other's backs, okay? This is how it works. So I am looking forward to getting Joe Carter on these
That'll
mics.
be fantastic.
Touch them all, Joe. I got questions for Joe. And that's scoop. How'd you get the scoop? Like, did somebody in the detail at the Bill Clinton's detail call you like deep throat and follow the jogging?
I actually, I believe, got it from, I can't remember his name. He was
Mark Stephanopoulos.
No, it was one of his best friends.
George. It's not even a Mark. It's a George.
He was with the Tigers, and then he played with the Blue Jays. Otis Nixon.
Oh, yeah.
Otis.
Bunt to Mike Timlin. Come on here.
Yeah. He had mentioned it, and sometimes if you hang around, like it was Gary Roberts used to be like this. Like he'd see us reporters standing around. A lot of us were like standing around, just thinking of what the hell are we going to do? Who are we going to ask? And they just had a loss or something, and it was a practice the next day, and they're getting really ground into the ground. But Gary would come up and tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, did you notice Ty Domi got on the second line?" And just
like a little tip.
Yeah.
Because he liked you.
Pat Henkin was like that. Darcy Tucker, fantastic. Like they knew, once they knew you were around, like you could talk, like they'd almost talk journalism to you instead of you talking hockey to them. It was really cool.
Well, have you noticed, I'm sure you have because you're in the business. Well, who am I talking to? I'm not going to mansplain this to you, but there is a breaking news out of Blue Jays organization almost always coming from the USA. Like the number of scoops from Sportsnet people you can count it. Like there's so few. All these scoops are coming from whatever ESPN guys or whatever American reporters. It's in this day and age. It's because of the access, right? Like you can't. I don't know who will I pick on here, but Gregor Chisholm can't buddy up to somebody the way that a Bob Elliott would buddy up to a Blue Jay and have those private chats where
that doesn't exist anymore. It does and it doesn't. Not as, say, not so much prevalent, but you knew who had inside scoops, right?
Right.
Like Gary Fraley, God rest his soul, with the Dallas Morning News, had an in with George Bush because George Bush was an owner of the Texas Rangers. And when George was president, he came up into the press box, or what was walking up through the stairway to the press box, and he looks over, and I was sitting with Jerry, or just standing there talking to him. And he goes, "Frails," and he waves the peace sign to him, and Frails goes back, "W, how the hell are you?" Right. So, I mean, that just doesn't work that way anymore. You don't get access. The message is controlled a lot more these days.
Right.
PR staffs are they PR the players. But I'm fairly certain that there are a number of people not outside, the so-called insiders who work very hard and have a lot of access. They get calls from players, Bettman, and whoever, because they want a certain message out, or they just have respect for them. But some of the beat writers will have players they can call. I'm not going to give those contacts away, but
where's that Rolodex? I need it.
You can still do it,
right.
But it isn't like during practice, right? Like you used to come in and the guys were taking their equipment off, so you could just go. And it still does it that way. But like after games, for instance, that dressing room's empty, then they bring certain players out, and you'll be lucky to get,
right.
Like in these last, say, 10 years where game stories, are insignificant because of social media, your editors would tell you, who's everybody talking to? If they're all talking to Austin Matthews, or they're talking to Matt Sundin or whoever, you go talk to the guy in the corner and make a story out of that.
Yeah. Hey, what a different time, but my goodness gracious. So you lived the best years, I'd say. You had a good run. I have a few questions here because you dropped a lot there. But one is, you mentioned like today, the Toronto Star today. So what was your last day at the Toronto Star?
November 3rd.
Okay, that far ago. It took you a long time to get in here for your exit interview. It's April, man. You're supposed to come here. You're supposed to do what Cam Woolley did, okay? He did a final shift on CP24, and then he drove here, and we sat down and talked about his career as a cop and as a...
He's cool, too. I've met him several times. He's,
you're a car guy, but that's how he got into the media business was cars, like cop cars and stuff.
Yeah, he was very much, if I remember correctly, warning about street racing and a lot of stuff that we used to do in the day over in Finch and Weston Road. And then there was the so-called King of the 407, which I didn't get part of. But by then, cars wouldn't do drag racing on the street. They would do roll racing, where they'd start from 60 or 80 or 100 kilometers an hour in the first to 300 or first to 150. So they would roll race on 2,000 horsepower GTRs and 1,500 horsepower Mustangs that were, probably cost $300,000-400,000 grand to get that way. And there was a lot of money involved, and that got busted up too. But well, Cam would warn against all that stuff, right?
Sure. Like hearing you talk, it's almost like a different language. I'm following enough of it to kind of keep up, but I'm thinking, I remember now. When I owned a car, I drove a 99 Mazda Protege for 21 years. I was lucky. If I got it to 140, that was a good day for the Mazda Protege.
Okay. Well, the car scene is off the charts these days, and actually grassroots drag racing is now the guys who started something maybe 15 years ago called Pinks are now on Discovery Channel with Street Outlaws, and they're multimillionaires off of it, and they're just street level guys.
Well, now that you're retired, this is a podcast, right? Your passion car. You could do some kind of a drag racing podcast. This is the future of Mark Zwolinski. So. Okay, I got a question though. You dropped a few things, and then I have some gifts for you, and then I have many more questions. You're my prisoner for the next several hours, Mark.
That's all right.
That's okay. It's rainy outside. What are you going to do, right? Yeah. So you mentioned so when you left the Star in November 2023, I think you said that there were like 5 writers, like active sports writers at the Toronto Star. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Can you name them? Maybe I take a guess at this. Like Gregor Chisholm writes.
Yes.
He was here with Keegan Matheson, his maritime buddy.
2 great guys.
Great, yeah, fantastic. Well, Maritimers, they're almost all great, right?
Absolutely. Can't go wrong. Cannot go wrong.
You're a Toronto guy, right? Because you're
Yes.
a kid from Keele Street to Part 2. Shout out to FOTM Leo Rowdens. But we have Gregor Chisholm. Mike Wilner writes for the Toronto Star Baseball. Is he one of the 5? Okay, so Chisholm and Wilner. Okay, Kevin McGran is a great FOTM there. Okay, now Dave Feschuk, he's in there. Okay, so that's like 4. So, but then I don't even know if he's a sports guy anymore. What's the status of FOTM Bruce Arthur?
Well, Bruce will probably swing in when sports gets serious, like Stanley Cup.
Because he's on like the COVID beat. Is he
yes.
Right?
Bruce is such a strong presence and personality, and absolutely, one of the finest writers in the country, that I guess the paper felt during COVID that they threw everything, right? That beat was something that the Star wanted to own.
Right.
And I was even on that beat for a while, and that shows you.
And you're like, I miss Argos football. What's going on here?
But Bruce, as he does with everything, dove into it and came out, with the real goods. He went into every single corner and nook, talked to every single doctor in person, and he became one of the leading voices at the Star, and perhaps in the country with this, on that very, very important beat.
So we don't count him as one of the 5 because he only for big stories he'll pop in. But I will say, Bruce is doing a good job, because there's a correlation between the number of death threats you receive on social media and the job you're doing, the success of the job
I've
you're
received them
doing.
myself, actually, but
well, it's a different time, right?
Yeah, Doug Smith does
FOTM Doug Smith, right.
And the type of thing is, though, like, back, like, again, when we started, I would do sidebars, right? And there would be 2 beat writers and a columnist or 2, during the playoffs, and we'd all travel together. That doesn't exist anymore. We write game stories off the TV, which is, quite frankly, to me, just not something I signed up for when I signed up, right? But that's it. Like Kevin works extremely hard as the dedicated beat writer. Now we have a young lad, Mark Coley, who came as an intern, but is extremely good, extremely talented. And I hope, to heck that they hire him and just give an added body that who can cover a bunch of things.
Well, they lost a body in Mark Zwolinski.
Well, that's it. And I heard about that too. They, among the congratulations was also the flip side. You're really leaving us at the wrong time here. But that's the business these days, right? So consequently,
but that's kind of amazing. Like, I'm just, as a guy who throughout the 80s would read, and you mentioned Milt Donnell and Frank Orr and Wayne Parrish, and of course eventually Damien Cox shows up, and all these guys that we were reading in the Toronto Star. It's kind of amazing to think it's Feschuk who politely declined his invitation to come on Toronto Mike. I met him at the Steve Buffery retirement party I alluded to earlier. But yes. Gregor Chisholm, who's been over a couple of times, Mike Wilner, who's been over many times, Kevin McGran, who's been over, Bruce Arthur's been over, Doug Smith has been on. One woman who did politely say she was a print gal and didn't want to do a podcast, who does step in for bigger sports stories, is Rosie DeMano. What's Rosie like?
Rosie's fantastic. Like, Rosie's sitting down, you're going to be speaking with a piece of history, right? Like, Rosie's, I think, the only other person at the Star who'd been there longer than I have been. I may be wrong at that, but there's probably 2 or 3 of us left. I'm not left anymore. I'm gone. But
you're gone.
Rosie started in the 70s, right? Like, Rosie has done everything that a journalist can do. And one of the most fascinating things I ever watched her write on was she went into the middle of the Pacific Ocean for the millennium, for the turn of 2000, from 99 to 2000, to be the first person who reported on the change of the century. And that's fantastic. And what a great, there's no way that would be accepted anymore for, like, in terms of an expense.
Yeah, you'd have to pay your own way now.
Which, and you'd probably have to leave about 2 weeks in advance.
Hey, do you have that option? Let me ask you this. So Kevin McGran, I don't know the answer. Maybe you know, because you're still fresh, only recently retired. But Kevin's in Boston for Game 1, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's say in some alternate universe where they don't send Kevin to Boston, can he just pay his own way to Boston? Like, they wouldn't care if he did that, would they?
Well, Mike, you touch on an absolute vital point about the future, the present and the future of journalism. You say you pay your own way. Well, that's another way of saying you're investing in yourself, because, the Sun doesn't send people. The Star only sends people the East Coast timelines. Basically, New York is something that's cheap to travel to.
Right.
And you have to spend a long time finding the cheapest flights and the cheapest rooms. So a person like David Alter bet on himself. He goes to every single game. If he gets money now, I think he's with the Hockey News now, but he, last year he went to every single game out of his own pocket and then splashed everything he could on his devices, on his presence, on his writing and everything he could do. And he came out ahead. That's how, we have to talk to journalists, and that's, I'd tell them, bet on yourself.
Bet on yourself. And Alter's a regular on this program. Also a massive fan of U2's Discotheque. Now, you said you stopped listening to music in 1970 or something. Like, quickly, we're going to go all over the place. I have an interesting Ed Keenan anecdote. I almost called it the antidote. That's something else entirely. Anecdotes. Yeah, that's why. I'm mainly a print guy myself. We only need an antidote for the anecdote. Okay, but David Alter loves his Discotheque, and I rib him about that all the time because as U2's a fine band, and I love a lot of U2, but Discotheque is not very high on my list of greatest U2 songs. But what are your bands? Like, what's your jams?
Led Zeppelin 1 album. Woke up this morning, found myself dead. Jimi Hendrix. My absolute probably favorite, Ball and Chain, Janis Joplin. I would get all emotional about Janis Joplin. Missed and couldn't get into the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. My wife and I really wanted to, but you had to be.
That was a shitstorm too. That's the one with Limp Bizkit break stuff.
Yeah, there was 3 Woodstocks, but the 69 one, the original one, that was the 50th anniversary of that 2 years ago. Okay. And
my apologies.
Now in my retirement, that's something I want to do, is go visit that and visit, like not reminisce about, the 99 one where they burned the place.
Yeah, sorry, I got my reunions mixed up.
No, not at all. It's just there was 3 of them. They didn't make money on the 69. They tried again. I think it was 94. And
94 had a big one with Green Day.
Yeah, and they did they said to themselves, we're going to do one more after that because we're not making them, like nowadays you can make money off it. Like,
right.
Where you see all
well,
these
bottled water is $12. So.
Well, that's what caused the riot in '99 was bottle of water. Back then they were charging $7 and $8 and it was
right.
blistering hot.
Right.
And it went from there. The kids got absolutely PO'd and they start, with some encouragement from
started to break stuff.
Yeah. And then it turned into a wildfire, literally.
Well, I think Red Hot Chili Peppers, they cover Jimi Hendrix Fire, and just to it felt like, I mean, they cover that for Mother's Milk, but again, my favorite Red Chili, but all the place. One day you got to come back and kick out the jams with me, man. Like just come here. We play your 10 favorite songs of all time. We talk about it. But quick, Ed Keenan comes on every quarter and sits right there, and we chat about what's going on in Toronto. Love that guy. But he was saying, okay, there was an idea for a podcast at Toronto Star. Maybe it happened, but like the best player to reach to wear each number.
Yeah,
okay.
I did a whole thing on that.
Okay, so then Ed was telling me that they thought you'd want to be a part of it post-retirement, but you were like, no, I'm out. Like, they're like, no, the minute you weren't on the payroll anymore, you weren't going to do that. Like, you were gone. And it's just, it's one of those things where he's like, he thought for sure you'd, for like love of the game, you'd want to be a part of that. But, when you retired, you retired.
Yeah, well, it's kind of weird because when you retire and you put that much time into it, I spent more time with covering sports and with people and at the paper and writers than I did with my wife, who I'll have my 44th anniversary with this coming May 3rd. So you think about that and you think about, like you have your speech and that's your moment. The light's on you and you bite a hole in your lip trying not to be tearful. And it's very difficult. And you think, after all of that, after that weight, like if somebody was to say, like paint a picture of your life, or say something about your life, that's what you'd have to mention, that you can then in turn walk away from it without wanting to do anything more. I don't know, I'm still struggling with that. And basically what I can tell you is I'm of the mind that one, and first and foremost, and you've heard me say this, and many people have, that I'm one of the most fortunate sports writers ever. I really believe that. But at the same time, I never wanted to, like when Wayne Gretzky retired at 39, he probably could have, and I'm not trying to make that analogy, but it just came to mind. Right. He didn't want to skate anymore and just be a sideshow. That, that's Wayne Gretzky, and there he is, the great one at 44 and 45 still playing. So I said, and I wasn't using that as an influence, but it just, like I said, it just came to mind. But it's a parallel in that it's time, and it's time now. Mark Coley has a chance to do, and he's a fantastic writer and a fantastic kid, from what I understand. That's a name, like to look at, and let's see what he can do. Let's give him the opportunity. So if I come back, or I want to do this, or I want to, there was a couple of the Pat Hickey, Montreal Gazette, had as much time in the business as I've had, and I think even more. But he retired specifically to give a young player, a young writer, a place to write, and that's very gracious. But that came to mind. I know Pat well, and he's a fantastic person. A person you would love to talk to about all this. If you have anything Montreal, that man knows it and lived it. So that's kind of like one of the influences that really had a weight with me, in that make it clean, get out of the way basically, and see what happens, because as tough as it is in journalism, especially for print, there is a future developing. There's something, it's going to rise again, and it has to, right? As a professional, unless they pull the plug on print media and just go digital. But even so, there's a next wave of people who are going to take it somewhere that's going to be fascinating to see.
I love that sentiment, and that's very noble of you and excellent, except be warned here, Mark, be warned, okay? I have witnessed over my many years having this podcast, I've witnessed, not with the Toronto Star necessarily, but I'll pick on the Toronto Sun for a minute. I've seen retirements, and nobody comes in to fill the void, okay? So
no.
Bob Elliott, Steve Buffery, I could run down other greats in the sports department who are gone, but who's the youngest guy there? Ryan Wolfstadt? Okay, he's my age, okay?
Yeah. Well, that's it. And nobody's hiring. That's the thing. They're,
right.
Interns are easy to do. You can turn them over. Yeah.
or freelancers, or
Yeah. Well, like for an intern, you pay them $13,000 every 4 months, right? Like that's sad.
yeah.
Because not so much that they're not going to get an opportunity, but there just doesn't appear.
But
to
try
be a
to live in
career
this city unless your parents are going to help you.
Yes.
Right? You can't live in the city of Toronto for that money.
Yeah. Well, especially on journalism money, like the way it is now. I always remember trying to help writers from Humber, from Seneca, from then Ryerson, right? And other writers would tell me, like, some of them are teachers, right? I said, so what do you tell these kids? And they said, well, these kids come up to me. They ask me a bunch of questions about all the future. How do I get started in this business? And the answer to them was, go back to school and become a lawyer.
Right.
I mean, it's so difficult. And I feel really terrible about that. But I do believe that as tough as it is, that there's always a dawn, right? There's always a dawn of some career and of some way that journalism is going to be done and told and written. And I'm really, really looking forward to that.
I hope you're right, because Pandora's box doesn't get closed. And we talked about the great disruptor that is the internet. And, you're not the only industry who's had to grapple with this massive, radio's going through the same thing, right? Like radio people are fewer and further between. There's no overnight live stuff. There used to be, you could buy a house as a radio person. Now forget about it. You got to live with a couple other families if you want to do that. And the other thing that's happening now in radio is also probably happening in the newspapers is that you'll have a show, let's say a show like the Roz and Mocha show on 92.5. Yeah. And that show will be live in Toronto, but it'll be the morning show in like 20 other markets across the country. And that used to be like a local live morning show that is now just the syndicated programming coming out of Toronto. But this is the deal when the internet shows up and eats your lunch.
Yeah. Well,
my goodness.
That's the case, right? And even before the internet, the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, there was a guy, I think from the New York Times, who was an expert in how to cover things in the so-called modern fashion. He came in, gave a really nice description of how the business is changing. And he says, look, bottom line is, here's what you need to cover the Vancouver Olympics: a mountain bike and a cell phone. And we all looked at him and said, are you crazy? And there was an expletive in there before, crazy.
You can swear on this show.
And he was right in a certain extent, because maybe the way he said it was going to change didn't exactly change that way, but change was coming.
Mark, this is how I cover the city: a bike, not a mountain bike, but my bike right behind you, and my phone. And a lot to be said there. Okay,
that's totally cool too.
Totally. Yeah, you got to film your own stuff, record your own stuff.
I think that's awesome. And that's the way I think people are going to do it. They're going to be individual artists, not so much employees or beat writers. They're going to be individual artists. That's the future, I think.
As long as the future has, people with integrity who follow a journalistic code sitting in on boring council meetings and all that important stuff, because I'm not there. Okay, so Mark, I want to give you some gifts. You finally made your Toronto Mike debut, and then I have questions. Questions came in for you. There's one person that you covered in particular I need to dive into. Where do I begin? Okay, so you played pro ball. So
yes,
you're in good shape, man. You might be able to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. I'm just sizing you up right here. Maybe when you and Joey Votto can join the team at some point here.
Well, I did do a story on Rob Butler last year, so maybe he said the same thing. But unfortunately, the shoulders are a little compromised these days. So
man, you got to hear that chat I had because Rob came over. He lives in the Durham region now.
Yeah, I went to his house, and it's fantastic.
Okay.
It really is cool.
Shout out to my buddy Elvis, who apparently lives down the street. So if his house is fantastic, Elvis's house is fantastic. That's what I say. Okay. But I'm going to be recording live from the season opener, which is May 12 at 2 p.m. at Christie Pitts. And I urge everyone listening to drop by. I got some cool cats coming. Speaking of great sports journalists, Stephen Brunt's going to be there.
Outstanding, man.
Yeah, coming all the way from the Hammer. We're going to have the great Blair Packham from the Jitters is going to pick up Rick Emmett from Triumph. Going to pick him up in Burlington and bring him to Christie Pitts. He's going to get honored before the game. Wendell Clark is going to be there. Rick Vive is going to be there. Great FOTMs like the aforementioned Steve Paikin and Peter Gross and Mark Hebscher. Oh, my God. So many great.
That's outstanding.
Rod Black is going to grow a mustache for this event. He's promised me on the recording here. So if you're around, man, you got to come out to May 12, 2 p.m. There's a name I'm going to drop in a minute. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a big name who's visiting Monday with Mary Ormsby, and I got to get him to come out for the game on May 12th as well. So I'm giving you a history book on the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. That's going home with you, Mark.
Thank you kindly, and I really look forward to checking that out because there is a great history there, as you know, and my heart still is with Jack and Lynn because they treated me really well, and Jack was actually very instrumental in getting me a news writing job in 1986 at the Kitchener Record. He knew the publisher, and he just phoned up and got me a job. I had to go get news writing experience because they actually let me go, and I went to spent a summer there and got my job back after I got the news writing experience. But it was really, really difficult and really, really hard. But Jack was really helpful to me, and Lynn, as you know, was just fantastic. And sitting up in that announcer's booth up above the field, it brings back some really, really great memories.
Well, forever Jack's Field. You know,
yes,
forever Jack's Field. Absolutely. Fresh craft beer from Great Lakes Brewery. Going home with you as well, Mark.
Thank
Delicious.
you.
They brew that here in Southern Etobicoke. I was actually last night. I was hanging with Joe Bowen at the GLB Brew Pub. They made a special Holy Mackinac lager, and $1 from every can is going to sick kids because
outstanding. I donate to sick kids myself.
I do too. And one of Sean Bowen, his third born, had leukemia as a child, and sick kids was there. And Joe is forever supportive of sick kids, forevermore, as you can imagine. And this is for a good cause. So, and it's delicious. I had 3 glasses last night.
Outstanding.
Shout out to Joe Bowen, who gets to go to Boston too, man. Don't you think it's crazy that? Don't you think that's nuts? Like, how much money does MLSE make that they cheap out on sending these radio guys on the road? It's nuts, right? I know you don't have to be careful. You're retired.
I can't get going on that, but
but that's nuts.
It is nuts, and you're absolutely right. And I would say even the newspaper, they have the money, and it should not be a question of money. If you're putting a newspaper out or you're putting a radio broadcast out, you have the money. Come on, like if you want to battle as a radio station or as a newspaper, you don't cut. You go at it full force until your last breath.
And let's not go down this road. I could spend an hour on this road, you know. But I have. Do you like Italian food?
Love it.
I have the most delicious lasagna in my freezer right now from Palma Pasta. They're in Mississauga and Oakville, so when you're in the West End, that's where you got to go. But you can go to palmapasta.com. You're going to love it because Peter Gross, for 70 plus years, has been eating every lasagna he can find, and he says he's never had a better lasagna than Palma Pasta's lasagna.
He would know.
He would know. That man knows. Peter Gross, man, you got to come out May 12th just to hang out with Peter freaking Gross. That guy's a legend.
Absolutely. I haven't seen him since I can remember. That
means you haven't been at Woodbine lately.
No. And well, there's another thing in the modern day that horse racing was not only a great thing to cover, but you would go because hockey people had horses. And if you ask Dave Perkins or Jim Proudfoot, who covered regularly back then, half the scoops they got were because they went Saturday and Sunday to Woodbine.
Wow. Okay. So you got the lasagna. Now, I will tell people that on June 27, I'm hosting TMLX 15. That's the 15th Toronto Mike Listener Experience at Great Lakes Brewery in Southern Etobicoke. This is like 30 Queen Elizabeth Boulevard down the street from the Costco. 6 to 9 p.m., June 27. Everyone's invited. Palma Pasta is going to feed everybody, and your first Great Lakes is on the house. This is just unbelievable. Come hang with me. We're going to have a great time.
Sounds terrific, actually.
You got to come.
You send me a reminder because I got the memory of a sieve right now.
Okay.
But
well, I did record this, so just listen back on June 26th. Hey, this is a great gift as well. This is a wireless speaker. Sounds amazing too. Ed Keenan had it blasting in his backyard at his 50th birthday party when I was at that. So
lovely.
It's courtesy of Moneris, because Moneris, in addition to you listening to Jimi Hendrix. By the way, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, all these people died at 27 years old.
27 clubs, quite large. It's really crazy.
And I guess so your cell phone goes off and you can't even pick it up on the recording. Like I hear it and it's like I'm at a spa or something, right? It's like that music in your head. Not that I go to a lot of spas, okay? But
I love my ringtone actually.
California, here I come. Right?
Yeah.
What's this? A big trip you're going on? What's going on? You're going to California?
I wish. I'd love to go to California, actually the southern tip of it.
California. Okay. So I would like to shout out Al Grego, who hosts Yes, We Are Open, and season 6 is dropping like every week. And the latest episode, he goes to Banff, Alberta, and he talks to the owner of Mountain Chocolates and learns about their trials and tribulations, because I guess you might have heard about this pandemic that really disrupted the tourism to Banff. And now that, you know, they're dealing with inflation and supply chain issues. So find out how they're doing. This is a great series to be inspired by small business owners across the country. It is called Yes, We Are Open, season 6 dropping now. Shout out to Maneras and El Grego.
Absolutely. Well, I just came back from skiing in Banff, so.
Oh, yeah, you're a big skier.
Yeah, and as you know, or as I mentioned, I'm a big model railroad and railroad fan, and Banff Station is still the way it was back in the days of steam, and it's absolutely beautiful, and I go there all the time, take pictures, and just kind of sit there and,
You need to be retired. You got too many passions.
Yeah, well,
Work's getting in the way
this
of your
retirement thing is cool that way. It really is.
And you're young enough to enjoy it. Like,
Yeah.
I just had an exit interview 2 days ago with Scott Turner, who was a longtime radio guy at CFNY and
Yes.
Energy 108. And Scott just retired, and he was just like, he's in his early 60s. He's 64. He's 64. And he's like, no, I need to retire now to enjoy life. And he just went to Costa Rica, and he's doing he's biking up a storm. He cycles like 50, 60, 70K rides all the time. But he needs to do it while he's fit and healthy and can enjoy it. You wait too long, you don't have enough time to enjoy life. You're a smart man here.
Absolutely. And time is, it's a gift. So
Right.
you can hear this from anybody, but you got to make use of it. And you don't have, that doesn't mean you have to be disciplined and do something every second of the day, but be involved in something. That's the best thing to do with your time.
So you got the railroad stuff going on. You got the cars. You got the skiing, and of course we talked about you're a bodybuilder, right? But I just got a just quick story, real quick one here is that so Rod Black, he's involved with the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, just like I am. And Rod Black is going to be there May 12th, and we were talking about growing his mustache. So I kind of mentioned him in the intro when Biff Naked was here last week. So Biff Naked is here. I love Biff Naked.
Absolutely.
Man, I love that woman. She's sitting here. I just mentioned the name Rod Black in the intro, and she goes, Rod Black from Winnipeg? And I'm like, yes, actually. Okay. She goes, I dated, but the word dating we'll use loosely. I was with his brother Derek, who was a big bodybuilder, and her relationship with Derek when she was very young, growing up in Winnipeg, she was probably a teenager in Winnipeg. When she's with Derek Black, this created a preference that Biff has had for many years, where she was very into bodybuilders. So it all gets triggered by Rod Black's brother in Winnipeg all those years ago. Isn't that a mind blow?
That's cruel. Very cool.
Wow. Okay. So one last gift here. This is from Ridley Funeral Home, and it is a measuring tape, man. You can measure those biceps and see if they're growing as you get.
You know what? This is really, these things come in handy, because if you're on cars or on trains where you're doing carpentry or you're doing renovations, this is pocket size. This is actually real cool.
That's for you, man. And
thank you so much.
shout out to Ridley Funeral Home, official funeral home of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. That's not a joke. You're at the paper in 88. I just want to ask you about this because of somebody who's visiting Monday. You're at the paper in 1988, and of course, the big story is Ben Johnson, and this story has many phases to it. There's the, oh my gosh, we have a guy who's, against Carl Lewis, who has a chance to win gold in the premier event at the Seoul Olympics.
Yes.
So there's that. Go ahead.
I was at York University in school then, and before that as well. And Ben Johnson, I was a sports reporter at the Excalibur, and Ben Johnson, Mark McCoy, and Desai Williams were walking around the track complex there with their shirts off, and that was one of the inspirations to get into bodybuilding, because those guys were gods, right?
Well, Ben had that barrel. Yeah, he was a strong upper body.
He was all that in a bag of chips, as they say. But they ruled, and they were just normal guys up there. You could go up and talk to them. Angela Taylor, Zajenko, God rest Angela Taylor's soul, and she gave me a fantastic interview. And Sylvie Frechette. The swimmer.
So in 88?
Yeah. well, after that, but like I remember interviewing her up there. York had a lot of like national team athletes. Karen Morch was a board sailor. I made some terrible mistakes on that story, and she gave me hell for it, and I still bothers me to this day. But
you learned.
Yeah, you learn the hard way, right? That's the only way to learn in journalism. You got to make a mistake and then get hell for it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. But yeah, Ben and those guys were up there, and you could watch them. You could go in. They ran indoors, they ran outdoors. York is such a different place now. The track complex up there is exquisite. The rinks and everything are so much different. But back then it was not even a shadow of what it is today. It was just so much more Spartan and simple. And, one rink, one track thing when, the football team played there. And it was, like you could walk and, in the winter you'd freeze your, what off. And we also used to walk. They had this great tunnel underground to go to the Complex 1 where a couple of the colleges were and your courses were. So, yeah, it was great. And Ben used to go to a club called Berlin, Young and Eglinton a lot. And my older brother, Walter, was kind of leading the house band there in the 80s and 90s for a while. And Ben, you could always see Ben there having a good time. And, I introduced my niece to him, and she was a huge fan of his. And she was like shrieking, like, I'm going to meet Ben Johnson and all that. And it was just, you get to know them. And Mary has covered the Dublin Inquirer in her book. It's coming out, and
it's out now. I have a copy upstairs, and so that's the catalyst for why on Monday. So we're recording on a Friday. So this is actually the next episode of Toronto Mike. Mary Ormsby is going to visit, but she's bringing with her Ben Johnson. Ben's going to be sitting down here, and it's going to be wild because I'm of an age where I think I was 14 years old when that race was run in Seoul and South Korea, and there's nothing like this in Canadian history where that kind of a high followed by that kind of a low, and it's quite a story. But it's fascinating to me that you're like, did they send you to Seoul?
No. I was more valuable. Well, if you want to call it valuable, but I was, baseball and hockey, and that's I not so much got slotted into that, but there's a need for that, right? Like,
of course,
I started out covering baseball much more, World Series and that, but the Leafs were terrible, but when Pat Quinn came aboard, hockey became a very big story. So I crisscrossed through both sports and eventually wound up on hockey. That's part of the reason I built up 6 months of vacation pay too, because I never took vacation. I was covering two sports, and put a lot of miles and wear on the old frame here. But it was a great time, and like I said, we still traveled with the teams, and being able to fly with sitting in the same plane as Roger Clemens, David Wells, and Roy Halladay, and all those names. You would learn some things, right? And you'd see them with their hair down. And we're talking about Michael Jordan and the Bulls. We got to stay in there, fly from Detroit to Toronto on an All-Star break. When the Blue Jays were visiting, we didn't have a charter back, and the Bulls lent us that plane, which was basically a very small charter plane that was like a flying casino. It was all velvet, black and red inside with dim lights.
And I'll bet there's a lot of gambling going on.
Well,
inside.
That's the thing, right? And it was outstanding. And you get to take, in those days, just there, it was not unwritten rule that you would never report what you see on the plane, because that's their time, and it's not official, and you're there, basically as a privilege. So,
but that is a good question. Like, where is that line? Like, I know there was a story I'm thinking of FOTM Steve Simmons, who was he's written a couple of stories, which some people thought were maybe like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas type deal.
Yes.
If I could borrow that line. But where is that line for you? Like, if you're on a plane and the players are just chilling out and you hear something or you see something, like how do you make the call whether this is something that should be reported or something that should be kept quiet?
Well, I'll give you an answer by giving you an example of something that I regret to this day. I had a very bad falling out with Ty Domi, who was very helpful to reporters and a very class guy like that. there was around the time when his brother had some kind of problem at City Hall, and I was making
the computer sales.
Yeah.
I remember this story.
Well, see, I had a story before that about once at least got out of the playoffs, and they had isolated Darcy, Shane Corson, and one other player whose name eludes me right now, and nobody had that story. And the headline the next day, "These Leafs aren't buds." There was a team party, and the three of them they weren't invited, and it turned into a real bad deal the next day. Yeah. Well, that was. I had a phone call from from a bar from Hemingway's, and they all got screwed out of it, and they were pretty upset, and they didn't mind that I wrote it. I just wrote it in a certain way. But anyways, with Ty, this was a little later on, but I sat in a meeting and I mentioned this, and I said, this is off the record. My editor at the time didn't give a damn about that, and he inserted himself into a story, and Ty read it the next day and never spoke to me again. And I regret that to this day.
You violated the trust.
Well, that's it. You talk about a line,
off the record,
right?
means off the record.
That's it. So if you're on a plane or you see something, or you see, like you said, gambling, you hear a story. I mean, I could tell you stories on flights that were absolutely insane. You don't report it, right? Like it's understood, right? Like Roger Clemens was big on that, and there was, Roger was like for instance, you used to have the pitch speed, the original pitch speed display at the Dome.
Right.
Roger absolutely put his foot down on that, and he had a lot of reasons for that. And we had a conversation about that. About giving things away. Roger was still, to me, one of the most ultimate competitors I've ever met. And, his whole history, about the Hall of Fame and all that is another story. And I think he deserves to be in there because he's really, in his early years in Boston, I think he still was the greatest right-hander I ever seen outside of Tom Seaver.
Him and Barry Bonds are guys you can say pre-dope. It all comes back to Ben Johnson here. But pre-doping were Hall of Fame worthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's a line, right? Like when you have that conversation, there's two things that happen. One, it's off the record. But two, if you keep it off the record, you only strengthen your relationship when you need something on the record. So say like today, the big thing today is like we react to things. We don't set a tone anymore. So, all we do is, when you have the chance. But say, for instance, when Marie-Philippe Poulin, one of my favorite hockey players, period, scored that great wrist shot goal. I had to get a hold of her, and I couldn't. And, they were still out wherever the hell they were out in the road, and she just couldn't get back to me.
Right.
So I wrote a follow-up story about how terrific that shot was. Now, I had to get some backup for that, the quotes to give it credibility. So I could phone Doug Gilmour. I could phone and try for Mario Lemieux. I could, who had great shots. Wendell Clark had a great shot.
What a wrist shot that man had.
Yeah, and you get that, and it goes, it helps you out. So what I'm saying is, you don't get phone numbers by reporting things that are off the record.
Right.
You get it by building a trust.
100%. I understand that 100%. Let me ask you though, so gambling rampant, I'm sure nowadays sports gambling is everywhere. There's a whole conversation to be had there. Except if you even got a sniff of, let's say, I'll make it up, but unnamed Blue Jay player betting on baseball. Like if you got a sniff of that, would that be that's a bridge too far? Like that kind of thing needs to be reported.
No, if you violate a law, then there's no, you have to do your job.
Right.
If you get a sniff of that,
you can't keep the water on something like that.
No, and that's understood, right? And there are some things that are probably happening to this day that are still not reported, and people don't get some people know but can't do it. But
sure.
At the same time, something that, like, if you're a public figure and you violate or get stuck in something, and we know situations, right?
Right.
That like it's understood. You have to do your job. Like, you just can't sit there and and say, hey, I know I can phone this person and get a quote or something, but I'm not going to do it because there's this line. That's understood. And, you talk about that with people, and you learn more about hockey or baseball, but they learn more about where you're coming from, right? And again, that only strengthens the relationship. And it's not like your brothers or, family or anything like that, but it's healthy, right? It's understood, and the respect between the two people is defined much stronger that way.
There's a gentleman who played for the Maple Leafs. I was a big fan, actually. Sadly, he's no longer with us, and we're going to I have a bunch of questions related to him. But before that, it's funny, I mentioned Sean Bowen earlier, who is the third born of Joe Bowen, who I was actually with yesterday. But Sean Bowen I think he's a in-house guy for the Argonauts now. Like he
yes.
So at this event yesterday with this beer that Great Lakes has, there were a bunch of people wearing Argos hats and Argos gears that he must know from the Argos community. And a question came in from I don't know if he's a real professor, but he's Professor James Fraser. And the question for you is, what is Mark's theory on how and why the stature of the Toronto Argos has developed in the way that it has during his time on the beat? Simplistic answers are a dime a dozen, but what's his explanation? Now that you're retired, what are your thoughts on the stature of the Argos in this market since you started covering them?
Well, we covered 2012 Grey Cup win. Then we didn't cover it. Then 2017. I was probably on it from 16 and 17 with Mark Trestman as coach. After 17, as we know, they went through 2 years of 4 and 14. There was, they did not anticipate that collapse. What happened, though, was fortuitous in that when Trestman went, then I think they hired Corey Chambliss as coach, and then they went 4 and 14 again, and that was, I think, 18 or something like that, or 19. So they brought Mike Pinball Clemens in as GM, Jim Pop out, Mike Clemens in. Mike probably doesn't get enough credit for what he's actually done for the feel that he has, not only for football, but for people. He brought Coach Dinwiddie in, and the two of them hatched a plan that they were going to be consistent, like the late 80s Edmonton Eskimos. They were going to create a roster, create a plan, play football a certain way, in that they were going to go to the Grey Cup all the time, just like the Eskimos back then, and now the Elks,
right.
Went 5 times. I think 5 times in a row to the Cup. But with that comes, you have to make moves, right? The draft, they started drafting Curly Gittins Jr., Tommy Neild, Peter Nicastro, players who not were just drafts but became stars. Curly's been traded since. But you also, you get American players up here. Sean Oakman, Dejan Allen became stars up here. They weren't just people who came up. They became stars. Now, absolutely, in 17, you had Ricky at quarterback. Great guy. And the CFL is all about quarterback, and it is in the NFL and it's not. But not necessarily. I find that with the Argos, yes, you got to have a great quarterback. But if you look at the Argos, they're going to, and you really look at them, and yes, there is the man himself, Doug Flutie. On the bobblehead there is actually a really terrific one, too. The Argos really, really did well with their offensive line, which is stunningly important. I think you only have to look at the Kansas City Chiefs to see that. And then defensively. And they built that and built that and built that. And, the last 3 years is seen the success, the fruits of that. But you look at that roster now, and you look at the playing time that, say, an offensive lineman like Darius Bladus gets. Darius is an all-star lineman who's been told, there's too many guys who are good, so your playing time is going to be there, and then it's not going to be there. And most of the players on the offensive line and all the players on the defensive side of the ball were told that, that you're not always going to play. You're going to be a starter, but you're 1A and then 1 and 1A and 1A double A, right? So the point is, with that plan that they hatched, in the first year was canceled. The 2020 season was canceled by COVID. So that might have been a blessing in that they actually had more time to devote to that plan and find the players that, they could pretty much bet the farm on that they were going to be successful up here. So they added that depth. They became a team that not only is successful, but was built on the fact that they had star players, but that their basic foundation had so much talent that there was two players who could start at almost every position. I think that's what led to the turnaround and to the success you've seen them have in the past couple of years. And they probably should have had 2 Grey Cups in the last 3 years instead of 1. Things don't work out and stuff happens, as they say. But you just take a look inside at that and see how, a 16-2 season, something done once before, that's the product of a lot of thinking that started with Coach Dinwiddie and pinball.
Absolutely. Now they have a bit of off-field issues they got to deal with in Toronto Argos with
unfortunately
Chad Kelly. And I will say I feel a bit bad for this franchise because I do root for the Argos. And they did get what I would say, well, I think it is absolutely the biggest crowd at BMO Field for an Argos game was that game against the Montreal
Alouettes, yeah.
That they laid an egg. Like they just completely that team that you mentioned was like, I guess they were 16-1 or whatever, completely laid an egg in front of the largest home field crowd since they moved to BMO.
Yeah, and that shows you what sports is all about. But that, I didn't cover that game because I had retired the week before that. And I'll be honest with you, I thought so much how I would have handled the writing of that game. And you would have to be, quite hard on them because that is an undefinable collapse. They were so far behind in the first 3 or 4 plays of the game that they couldn't recover. Right. And that team should recover based on what we were just talking about, the depth that they had. Right. So that is a measure of how colossal, like with the Leafs in 12 with the 4-1 lead, right? Like it just mathematically cannot happen, but it did. So
I remember.
Yes, we all do. And I still talk to
2013,
James.
Right?
12-13 season. And I still talk to James Reimer about that when I see him, and because we remember him being sprawled out on his belly with his, just looked like he was doing snow angels on the reverse side in the crease after that goal went in. So yeah, it happens, right? And that's why we go, and that's why they play the games. That's why we go.
That's why we love sports.
Indeed.
You never know what's going to happen. By the way, just to mop up a little something, we couldn't remember the third person there. So you mentioned Darcy Tucker and Shane Corson. And on the live stream, the VP of Sales tells us it was Travis Green.
Yes.
As your third guy.
There was a Swedish player there, too. I can't remember his name, and I should. And there's another story with him about the World Championships and Torts not allowing. He was the only player. I think he moved on to Tampa, and Torts wouldn't let him go.
Modine?
I think it wasn't Modine.
No, I'm trying to name now. I'm going to just name Swedes.
Yeah, and at any rate, I can't remember, but he was there, and he wasn't allowed to go to the celebration of the World Championship gold medal in Sweden, which apparently was one of the greatest hockey celebrations of all time in Stockholm.
Wow. Okay, so now that we've segued over to Leafs again here, thanks. That was very thoughtful on the Toronto Argonauts, and the professor who submitted that, I hope, is pleased. But I got a number of questions about a guy, and we got to spend a little time on this. You've been amazing, so I just want to say thank you. Now you need to just spend maybe 3 hours on this guy, okay? So I'll read a few questions before we even hear from you, and then we'll dive into it. But Tyler writes in, for Zwolinski, that's you, Zwolinski. I believe it was his book on John Kordic that was going to be source material for a movie. I think it was going to be directed by Bruce McDonald and starring Hugh Dillon as John Kordic. I'd love to know if that's correct, and if so, what involvement in that project, what his involvement in that project was. So let's just set this up by saying you wrote a book, The John Kordic Story, The Fight of His Life.
Yes.
That is the definitive bio on John Kordic. If you're looking to learn more about the late Maple Leaf John Kordic and that whole story. And then that guy's name comes up a lot on Toronto Mike because I keep having, Gord Stellick over, and then we always talk about Cordnell and Kordic and everything. But before we dive into it, can you tell me, is that true that there was going to be a movie directed by Bruce McDonald on the life of John Kordic based on your book that was going to star Hugh Dillon from the Headstones?
Yes. still have the script for it. Lynn Crosby wrote it, and we were really, was ready to go. But as you know, it takes you have to get corresponding rights to portray and or include an NHL jersey in the filming. It takes approval, which we didn't get. That was a real damper on that project. It turned out, I believe, if my memory serves me right, that CBC was interested in making it a movie of the week and turn it into like a fictional team and a character.
Yeah, like the Toronto Bay Leaves.
Exactly. Like you even look at the Austin Matthews commercial right now, where he's slamming stuff and breaking stuff on the wall. He has a blue and white uniform on, but he doesn't have a Maple Leafs.
A great example of this, real quick, is that my brother and I were talking about this movie last weekend, because apparently I'm now hearing that people said it was a bad movie, but I have such glorious memories of this movie as a kid. I refuse to believe it was a bad movie. But The Natural was the New York Knights, and it was always like New York Yankees, but
Yes.
they couldn't use Yankees, so it was the New York Knights, and that's sort of what you're saying. Make it with
The great old Memorial Stadium in Buffalo.
right. Now,
which is one of
did
my
you like
favorite-
that movie?
Loved it.
See, I loved that movie. My brother loved that movie. But lately I've been hearing on various like nostalgia podcasts that it was terrible. These are all these younger people revisiting it, that it's a terrible movie. And I'm like, we talk about the same freaking movie, Wonder Boy. Like, we're talking about The Natural that has been parodied by The Simpsons 100 times. What a wonderful film. Okay, I digress there. But you can always have a nice natural digression here. So they never made the movie, and then Hugh Dillon at some point is too old to play John Kordic. So I don't know. Is this still? I guess you still can't get the rights to use NHL stuff.
That's mothballed, and I've since written.
You want to make it with me as a side project and we leak it?
Well, interestingly, about 3-4 years ago, TSN, I think, in Montreal came and did a whole documentary on it. The book. They followed me through the office walking. They came to my desk at the Star when we're still back in the old 1 Yonge Street building, which is hard for me to believe, the old 1 Yonge Street building, but it's gone now. Well, it's there, but we're gone.
The building's there. The Star is gone.
Yes, over to the old Globe building at the bottom of Spadina. There, I was surprised, actually, because that's years after the fact, years after that movie was, kind of didn't get made. That there was still talk about it and interest about it, and then in Quebec City, especially, where he spent his last days,
right?
They still talk about it, and undeniably so, because the story of his fall is a cautionary tale that I think the league learned from, and has since we've lost. The league has lost players due to brain injury and stuff like that, and that's
Chris Simon just passed away from likely from CTE. I don't know if that's been proven yet.
And that is something still that is, I don't think it's been the truths of it, the acknowledgement of it, and the proper response to it still hasn't really unfolded as it should. So these things they come back, right? And the Kordic story, as much as John wasn't, say a top 6 player to put it mildly,
right?
That his story does provide, a lesson and something to remember and something to learn from, and as it does with most players and pretty much all players, like. This is, again, why we show up to cover it and tell those stories. And I think, again, about the future of journalism is these stories. If you can come up with them and you find out enough and have enough of a relationship with a player and tell their real story, that's, I think, where it's going, and that's what people would be interested in.
Right. Tell me a story. The humanity of it all. We can all relate to the humanity. Even non-hockey fans can relate to the humanity of the John Kordic story. And you're right, a cautionary tale, a tragic tale. Elephants and Stars. His real name is Manfred, but that's his band, Elephants and Stars. He's an FOTM, and he's a huge John Kordic fan. Whenever I have a Stellic on, be it Bob, but mainly Gord, there's always a conversation about the Cordinal. By the way, do you think that was a good trade for the Leafs, Cordinal for Kordic? Some argue it was a understandable, decent trade, but it's very popular to take the other opinion.
I think that if I were to really try and categorize it now, I'd say it was a 50 50% venture on the good side, probably much stronger on the bad side. But it's not. I don't think it was a question of a good or bad trade, because the consensus would probably be a bad trade. It was a trade that was needed. And given the coach at the time.
The coach wanted to toughen
That's
up.
right. And that still exists today with Ryan Reeves, right? The criticism he got at the beginning of the year for being on the ice for all those goals. And yet, we're now going to talk about, is he going to be on the roster for the postseason?
Can the Leafs beat Boston? Before I
Yes,
get back to John Kordic?
absolutely.
I agree.
They can beat everybody this year. They have.
I've been saying this all year. For some reason, this year I feel like, why not the Leafs this year? Like, we could beat Boston.
You can beat Boston. You can beat Florida. What they have, I don't think I ever thought myself that it was a question of the same old question, being tough enough and this and that. They play tough in a certain way. Unfortunately, two of the top four players, the core players, are not physical players. So that you can look at, and that's always going to nail home that argument.
Right.
But right now, yes, if you look at what Jake McCabe did the past two games, that's how you win championships. That guy, like, if you're going to hand out that belt that they hand out, you should have just left it in his locker for those two games, because that, like I said, that is the intangibles that win, and they have that. I think they have, yes, that you can say they're tougher and this and that, and with Ryan and with Edmondson and Benoit and Jake, and that's a very big thing, because now your other players who aren't as physical can go out and work harder, and again, it's just it's not always winning a fight or smashing somebody out. It's just getting in position, putting your stick in the right place. I think they've learned that lesson, and I'm very, very probably excited to see how they play against Boston. It would have been great against Florida, but Boston is a real, because they've been the barrier, right? They've they just know they can beat the Leafs. Well, let's see what happens this time.
Absolutely. And I will say, as a guy who was hanging up Joe Bowen yesterday, that how badly did he want to call Austin Matthews' 70th goal? Like, that just felt like it was inevitable and it was going to happen. And they were feeding him all game, especially the last game. And they pulled the goal. Was it 5? I don't know.
He should have had 76 goals. How many chances he had in the last two games?
And it's like, you just, and then I had I have a couple little kids, and I got them in, well, at least the 10-year-old, I got him into this whole idea of, like, you don't understand what 70 means. Like, we just talked about Rick Vive. You're going to see him on May 12th. Well, that's what we had, 54 goals, Rick Vive. Anyway, he never got to 70, but 69 is a cool number too. But I got to get back to Elephants and Stars, because he's yelling at his phone right now. Elephants and Stars, few questions. Let's start with this one. What was your impression, Mark, of John Kordic while you were covering him on the Leafs beat?
That's I hope it's not too long-winded, because where I really covered him was when he got, he was cheering. He was caught on the camera cheering a goal of another team because he wasn't getting played. So they shipped him up to Newmarket to play with the Saints. And I got assigned to that story, and I stayed up there in a hotel right next to where they were staying. And John was, if you go into Newmarket now, on the corner of 9 and 11, there's a hotel there, and that's where he stayed. And unfortunately, there was a bar around the corner from there, which is where he pretty much lived when he wasn't at the rink. So my impression of John was he was in a very difficult, vulnerable way. He knew he wasn't going to get back anymore, and it was just a matter of them getting rid of him at the end of the season. So he wasn't taking it seriously, and he couldn't perform or do anything because he was, staying out late, and there was a lot of nightlife and a lot of things he was doing, and he used to phone me to see if he could get a ride home at 3 or 4 in the morning and stuff like that. So yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult to see, but at the same time, you saw more of the person in there, as far buried as it was by everything else. And I really, like I said, all of a sudden he got traded. I never talked to him again. I tried to get through him, I think he went to Washington. I really wanted to talk to him. I just wanted to talk to him, not about anything else. Just say, how the hell are you?
Right.
I got cut off from that, and I actually got a couple of messages to him through, friends that he had here and people who were pretended to be his agents and said they were his agents and were full of shit. And I actually went to meet one of them, and he was actually running a TV shop up by Yorkdale, which is around the corner from where I used to live. And it was like, oh man, are you kidding me? Come on. I got my chain pulled on that one, but he did know him, and he said I was representing him on this and that, but that's what was happening. It was so loose and flimsy, and it was so unprofessional, and on all aspects from all parties. And he died virtually less than a year or months after that. So in Quebec. So yeah, I saw the last part, and the arrow was falling by then, and it was difficult. It was a very difficult thing to see.
And for you personally, what was it like when you learned the news that he had passed away?
Well, I was sitting on a couch at home, and there was the equivalent of what CP24 is now, and there was a ticker tape at the bottom says, John Kordic dead at 27. We were mentioning the 27 club.
I got chills here, man.
Yeah, and yeah, your heart drops, and we've all suffered losses of family members and stuff like that, and this one hurt. It's hurt as much as anything, as losing parents. I was living in Schaumburg at the time when I decided to write the book, and start learning more and more about things, and how it happened, how it went down, how he spent his last night. And you can ask my wife. I had tears in my eyes going to bed every night, thinking about everything we're just talking about, and then thinking of, that what I just learned, and having a bigger picture, and having an impression of it, and just like, I don't know, sometimes things just go right through to your heart, and you can't help yourself. It hurts to see. And this is a life, a weight of a life, and it's cut off early, and it makes you realize that I don't know what love is, I don't know what life is. I think it's just the things that come to us, and then how much the love that comes to us, how much our love comes back out. That's I don't know how else to explain it, and that's John's famous character, and I just always questioned how much love he had in the last little while of his life. I think very, very little. It was. We could go over the details and stuff like that, where he was, how he ended up where he was. And that would have never happened if there was even an ounce of love in his life at that time.
Elephants and Stars writes, what thing, singular, did you find out that surprised you the most while researching the book?
Trying to crack how he spent his last night and what happened with the police intervention was very difficult. I used to work at the Star in the radio room from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m, and then on Fridays I would drive to Quebec City. Starting at 1, I'd leave Toronto, drive to Quebec City because my wife's sister lived there, and I'd do my research all weekend, then leave Sunday night and get back in time, the 9-hour drive, and start my shift Monday morning in the radio room. So there was a lot in there, but I got to know a woman by the name of Louise Lupin, who's since passed away of cancer, but God rest her soul. But she helped me out, and we got a hold of the police, and I got a firm picture of it. But the thing is, I had to write that book in less than 9 months. So there's a lot of stuff that went down, a lot of stuff that happened. I could not you have to confirm that, right? You can't just say it happened.
Right.
So at the same time, the family wouldn't help me because they had a lawsuit going on, and they went nowhere with that, and they got stonewalled as well. But that was the most difficult, but the thing that stood out the most was my first real experience with, basically trying to tackle a police force, and several of them actually, because there were several jurisdictions that showed up on the night he died in that hotel room. But you learned something, and you learned that you might actually spend a year, 2 years trying to crack that and get nowhere. And outside the people who did help me, and there was, gang-related, mafia-related people in Montreal who helped me. And I had to watch where I got put up against a wall by people coming into a bar trying to talk to somebody. Right. And I said, what the F are you doing here? You get your ass out of here or you'll be in the ground, right? I had a gun pulled on me. So that is interesting. And it wouldn't be the first time that happened either. But
you've had multiple guns pulled on you.
Yeah, we have some stories there, much too divergent from this topic, but it was like that scares the shit out of you, right? Or at least it sticks in your mind, and give you nightmares. But this, as a professional, And as somebody who'd never done it before, that really stuck out because it was trying to, climb Everest in your bare feet, right? You just don't have the tools to penetrate that type of thing or the time. So I did what I could with it, and I had some help. But I actually, once you start scratching the surface, you really can get into it if you had the time. That's what I learned. I learned how to appreciate investigative reporters who do that type of thing now, that it sometimes takes, you don't see them write for months and possibly a year, and then they come up with something that's worthwhile. And that's how investigative journalism works. And I'd never been privy to that, or never actually done that until that mid-90s time when I wrote that book. And it really stood out as, now you know what you're in the business and what it's really all about, and how difficult it is, no matter how good you think you are.
Like, I know you have many passions to explore in this retirement of yours, Mark, but there is a compelling and fascinating podcast series to be recorded and produced on this story, the life of John Kordic, and you'd be the guy to produce that sucker. I'm just throwing that out there. A John Kordic series, 10 episode. This is what the people, my people, are looking for, anyways.
Yeah, I thank you for that,
Manfred. One last Manfred question here, and then quick shout out to a couple of partners, and then one last question. So you've done amazing here. Okay,
thank you.
Giving you, I don't know how many podcasts you've done, but
it's the first.
Okay, you know what? You hit it, home run at your first pitch you faced in the big leagues here. I'm impressed right now.
Thank you.
Manfred writes, have you heard about the alleged incident when his junior team went away on vacation after the Memorial Cup tournament?
Every word of it's true. Every word of that's true. What happened to him, how he was approached sexually.
Sexual abuse. He was a victim of some kind of sexual abuse there.
And that is, every word of that is true.
But did you know about it at the time you wrote the book?
At the time, I found out about it, and it was explained to me. And again, it is something that particular couple of people got away with, and I actually went out west to talk to them, and they still wouldn't acknowledge it, and that it was all just hearsay and BS. And so I had to actually, physically go through this to confirm that, and or at least approach the subjects involved to get their side of the story. So, yes, it's I'm not afraid to say, even though factually that there's nothing there, there are no charges, or nothing like that. So you have to say that, but I'm not afraid to say that that's all true.
And as we look at the story, and this is why you wrote the book, and this is why we need, I feel like this will be a retirement project for you to document for a podcast series. But we need to, it's textbook almost in that he experiences this trauma as a very young man. And then, and he's gone at 27 because he treats, he self-medicates with substance abuse and alcoholism. It's I don't want to minimize it by saying it's textbook, except this is where the heartbreak is, and this is what makes it such a tragic story, is the lack of love and support, and nobody there to help him heal.
Yeah, well, the sad part is, and again,
sorry, Peter Gross is calling. I just want I could take it live on the air.
Do it.
Okay, I'm doing this. Hold on here, everybody. We'll get back to John Kordic. Peter Gross, you're live on the air right now.
Well, I'm calling you for another big favor.
Okay, well, firstly, can you say hello to Mark Zwolinski, who's just retired from the Toronto Star?
Hello, Mark Zwolinski. I've read your stuff.
Hey, Peter. Same here. It's been a long time since we've bumped into each other in the past, but we're talking like decades ago. But I think it's awesome that you're calling in. It's really, really great to hear your voice.
Well, it's part of the aging process. It's always a long time between whatever.
It's not the age, brother. It's just the mileage.
Hey, Peter, I know you'll be at Christie Pitts May 12, but I'm trying to get Mark to come out too, and then you guys can have a reunion.
Well, the fact that I'm going to be there should bring him out, don't you think?
Absolutely.
I think he's going to be there, actually. I can read it in his eyes.
Yes.
So what is the favor?
Well, I went to the Sovereign Awards last night. I wasn't nominated for anything, but it was very enjoyable. And I'm looking for clips from it to put into my podcast. And I found a 7-hour piece of audio, but I can't get into YouTube to access it. If I were to send you the link, could you reduce it and send the audio back to me?
So you want me to take this link and give you like a 7-hour piece of audio?
Yeah.
You know what? For you, I would do that.
It's not going to take you 7 hours.
Oh God, no.
I'm going to send you the link because I can't do anything with it, and it's frustrating me.
But is there only, like, if you tell me, for example, like it's 7 hours, but if you said, hey, Mike, I only need like 6:22 to 6:28, I could just send you that 6 minutes.
I need 5 clips that happen between 8 o'clock and 9:45, but I don't know what the time code would be
Okay,
on.
I'll send you the whole, that's a long one, but I could do that. Send me the link, and then I'll send you an MP3 of the whole thing.
Okay, but continue and finish your interview with Mark.
You know, we were talking about John Kordic. Did you ever meet John Kordic?
No, that's the Leaf player who unfortunately died, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
1992.
No, I don't think I ever met Kordic.
Okay. Well, listen, Peter, that's the second favor in 2 days. I'll just say second big favor in 2 days.
It's adding up. when you measure the pleasure that I brought into your life the last several years.
Oh, no, it's no contest. That's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
All right, so say goodbye to Mark. You'll see him on May 12th.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Look forward to it, Peter. All the best.
See, let's hear that on a Toronto Star podcast. Okay,
Yes.
so back to so to wrap up, it's so tragic. But you were saying before Peter Gross rudely interrupted our chat about John Kordic here, but in a very serious topic. But so the book, can people still get this book?
Well, it's obviously out of print. Macmillan is no longer a publisher either. But from what I understand, Amazon would
It's out
have
there.
it for like pennies.
The John Kordic story, The Fight of His Life by Mark Zwolinski. Pick it up. And then again, honestly, I would be very interested in somebody like yourself hosting a podcast series where you dive deep into his life and cover all this. This is a compelling but tragic story of a former Maple Leaf who, was famously traded for Russ Courtnall. There's a lot in this story that I think would be compelling to people.
It's fascinating, regardless of how you measure a hockey career, because much of the stuff involves life, love, how fame affects somebody, just how vulnerable a young person can be. And this is back in the day where they had very little protection from nefarious elements of society, people,
Right.
and that how attractive that can be to a young mind. It's a timeless story, and I'm sure parents these days with famous athletic children, go through the same things, but have much, much, much more resources at their fingertips to help them through this, possibly in a small way related to what happened to John.
It's reading a comment on the live stream from Jeremy. He says, taking live Peter Gross calls, another reason this podcast is great. You won't find that anywhere else, people. If you want to hear live, unexpected Peter Gross calls, it's during the interview. That's only here. All right, I want to just quickly shout out recyclemyelectronics.ca, Mark, because if you have old devices, old electronics, old cables, don't throw them in the garbage. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, and then they'll tell you where you can drop it off to be properly recycled so the chemicals do not end up in our landfill.
Very worthwhile.
That's very worthwhile. Also, now that you're retired, I'm sure you have somebody. Maybe you manage it yourself. I don't know. But regardless, there is a great podcast from Raymond James Canada called The Advantaged Investor, hosted by Chris Cooksey, whose son is a hell of a hockey player. So shout out to Cole Cooksey, a hell of a hockey player. We'll see what happens with his career. But whether you already work with a trusted financial advisor or manage your own investment plans, like I said, The Advantaged Investor provides the engaging wealth management information you value as you, Mark, and everybody listening, you pursue your most important goals. So that's you enjoying refurbishing old muscle cars and all that exciting stuff. Okay, you've been awesome. Honestly, I've enjoyed every minute of this. You're aces at this. I can't believe this is your first podcast. My last question for you before we say goodbye, because I've taken so much of your time, is if you had to pick one story, like your favorite story you covered during your entire career at the Toronto Star, what story was that?
First World Series, because for obvious reasons, but because you're much younger, you're kind of at a strong physical and emotional, mental period of your life where, aches and pains, for instance, aren't a problem. And, you look different and you're just in that, you're 32 years old, right? So I loved baseball too. I wasn't that far removed from it.
Right.
And watching a World Series, for instance, just as an aside to that, Sparky Anderson, when he was alive, they used to ask him, are you going to watch baseball after you retire as a manager? And he says, no, not much. And he says, well, what baseball are you going to watch? He says, I'll watch the series, which meant that, everything else was just anticlimactic. If you're going to watch ball, watch the best of the best of the best.
He played at the Toronto Maple Leafs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Sparky played at the old stadium. That's
I
gone
think
now.
he was involved with it.
Right.
And
Okay.
Sparky had a saying in the Tigers dressing room that still sticks with me today. It says, the world turns over every 24 hours for those who are on top of it. So, that World Series and watching, how it went. And I think the 93 series was probably much more, not much more, but...
well, you got to win at home in 93.
Yeah, and it was maybe somewhat, I don't know what the word is, special that way, but the first one, being a part of that in my small way was something that I'll never forget, and something that's probably I could highlight as a number one highlight.
It all comes back to Otis Nixon. See how we did that?
There he is. Outstanding.
What's up with the bunt? I mean, I guess, he's super fast. He's thinking, but geez, bunt, Timlin fielded that pretty easily, and then Joe Carter's at first base, and we're going nuts here.
I know. I guess they tried to surprise them at that time of the game and take advantage of it, but Timlin played it well, and remember seeing Joe jump up and down, and it was crazy. But Otis was a real character, an old school player.
Old school guy who, when he was in his 20s, looked like he was in his 60s. Like he had an old man look to him.
Yeah, but Otis was sinewy, muscular, and never... I've known several people like that. He had so much vascularity and athletic ability, he could just get out of bed and run a 10-second 100-meter. It was incredible.
On that note, Ben Johnson, 979. He's in the basement Monday. And you know what weird coincidence is that in this basement Wednesday, because I produce his show, is Donovan Bailey. So this is a weird moment, okay? And I'll just say this because it's blowing my mind and I'm boring people by mentioning it. But next week, Donovan Bailey won't be the fastest guy in my basement. Like, just take that in.
That's outstanding. And you need to play that up.
I can play it up. But I'm worried that I don't think they love each other, those two gentlemen, actually. Just because I've had so many conversations with Donovan, and I think it's because obviously Donovan was stripped of his 979. It's technically like it happened. I watched it happen live, but it didn't happen in the record books. And I think that Donovan, who says he ran clean and was never caught with any performance-enhancing drugs in his system ever, doesn't want that stench on him anywhere.
No, and you can't blame him for that.
No,
it's a legacy, and that was 979 is one heck of a legacy.
Maybe Usain Bolt will come on one day, and then I can say, okay, we beat them both. But thank you for this, Mark. What a pleasure. We got to take a photo by the tree after I get your lasagna. But you were amazing, and maybe you come back and kick out the jams one day.
That would be terrific, and I would just like to say thank you for having me, and really, really wish all your listeners the best and safe driving and health and happiness.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,473rd show. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Toronto Mike. Much love to all who made this possible. That is Great Lakes Brewery. Don't forget your beer. Palma Pasta. I'll get your lasagna. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Raymond James Canada. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. You've got your book. Moneris, you've got your speaker. And Ridley Funeral Home, you got your measuring tape. See you all Monday when my special guests are Mary Ormsby and Ben 9.79 Johnson. See you all then.
How about you? How they're picking up trash and they're putting down roads. And they're brokering stocks, the class struggle explodes. And I play this guitar just the best that I can.